Thanks for joining us. We got people from all over Canada here. We got people on both coasts, I think. So for all of those of you in the Pacific time zone, thank you for skipping work. And for the Newfoundlanders, thanks for skipping the second hour of As It Happens. I know that there are big trade-offs we have to make to engage with our political system. So thank you for being here. Um, the three major stories we want to, oh, hello, Pat from Halifax. The three major stories we want to talk about tonight are all related. We've got the election, we've got the climate crisis, and the trade war. It's like trying to screw in the base of a Christmas tree, like you advance one screw and it throws the other ones out of whack and you're moving around. All of these things are working together in opposition and in all kinds of different complicated ways. The trade war's very existence has already flipped the election on its head. It's made Carney the front runner. Obviously, from a climate lens, that might be seen as a positive thing compared to Poilievre's conservatives, but it's also given the Liberals and others the all clear to abandon major climate policies. Many of our political leaders are talking about building new pipelines to fight back against Trump, which might give us an economic win, but would, of course, lock in more decades of dependence on oil exports. At the same time, renewable energy and electrification seem to be going full steam ahead, despite Trump's best efforts. And that's putting Canada's critical minerals in hot demand, maybe too hot, attracting a lot of attention from down south. So you see what I mean? It's all very messy. Thankfully, I don't need to untangle it. That's what we have our panel for. Darius Snieckus has reported on the global renewable energy, hydrogen, and oil and gas markets since 1996. Before joining CNO to cover Canada's clean economy sectors, he was technology editor and later editor-in-chief at international renewable energy platform rechargenews.com. David McKie is National Observer's managing editor. He manages news, essays, and opinion writing from Ottawa. He is a highly valued member of our executive team and the guiding force behind much of our data journalism and some of our key investigations. Max Fawcett is our lead columnist and a former magazine editor and writer. He's distantly related to Canada's worst prime minister, and it's probably not the one you're thinking of. Afterwards, you'll be hearing from Linda Solomon Wood, Canada's National Observer's founder and publisher, and the CEO of Observer Media Group. And moderating the panel tonight is Adrienne Tanner. Adrienne has worked for National Observer for 4 years, the last 2 as editor-in-chief. Before that, she was deputy managing editor of the Vancouver Sun and wrote a weekly column for the Globe and Mail. Adrienne's been my boss since I started working here, and this is her last day. As we report on our election and the peaceful transfer of power, we're going to be modeling it here today too. As of Monday, I'll be stepping into Adrienne's role as editor-in-chief, so you'll be hearing a lot more from me in the coming weeks and months, and I'm sure enough. So before I hand it over, I should make a couple last-minute notes here. There will be a Q&A. Please read the rules posted in the chat box below. You can see all the buttons you need to engage with that on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And one final thing, if you value the work we do, please take a moment to subscribe. We're reader-driven, we're reader-funded, so we really appreciate your support. Now, on with the panel. Here's Editor-in-Chief, Adrienne Tanner.
Hi, everyone. I'm a little bit nervous because there's lots of you, but boy, we're going to have some fun because who isn't talking about politics right now? Oh my. I know it's the only thing going in my house. So I'm going to start out with a question for Max, because this was a big story this week, and oh my gosh, Danielle Smith just seems to be taking her own way. So, Max, you write a lot about Alberta, where Danielle Smith has positioned herself as an outlier in this trade dispute. What are the consequences of her actions? And what are the federal party's best strategies with how to deal with her?
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I love seeing everyone's name on the chat there. So if you can pop your name in and tell us where you're from, that's great. Gosh, what are the consequences? I mean, for Pierre Poilievre, the consequences are dire. She has shown sort of Canadians that there are two sides of this issue. There are the Doug Fords and the Mark Carneys who believe in fighting back against a bully and who believe in standing up for Canada. And there are the Danielle Smiths and the Scott Moes in Saskatchewan who believe that if we're just nice enough, flattering enough, um, supine enough, if we lay close enough to the floor, maybe he won't kick us. And that clearly hasn't worked because that's not clearly not where Canadians want to go. Um, but because Pierre Poilievre has not been willing to call her out on that, it really has created this wedge that has. It's not the only reason why the Liberals are in this increasingly commanding lead, but it is certainly a big part of it. And she just cannot seem to get out of her own way on this. You'd think that the order would have gone out for her to, stand down, stop talking. Certainly don't go to Florida and hang out with Ben Shapiro. Um, but she is playing her own game here. There are two possible reasons why she's doing this. One is just simple distraction. She is facing an ever worsening crisis around the management of the healthcare system. The former CEO of Alberta Health Services was fired. It turns out she was investigating some very sketchy contract dealings with private surgical facilities. This is a good way of changing the channel domestically and getting people to talk about something else, even if it's her potential treachery. Um, the other, I think, more sinister and scary possibility is that she genuinely believes in the manifesto that her chief of staff wrote a few years ago, the Free Alberta strategy, and she is trying to wedge Alberta into a conversation around its own independence, and she is acting uh, clear of the federal Conservatives and actually wants Carney to win because Carney and the Liberals are a better wedge, a better opponent against which she can kind of drive up support for Alberta's independence and sovereignty. So, I mean, that's a very risky play. I don't think it will work for her, but those to me are sort of the two possibilities. And in both cases, Pierre Poilievre is basically political roadkill. So take that for what it's worth.
Woo. Okay, things to watch. And this leads me to a question I'd like to ask David McKie.
Mhm.
David, you've covered many, many elections during your day, and the polls are now showing, Mark Carney, as Max says, benefiting from this. Um, I want to know from you, um, what are the types of things that can derail a lead, that he's got on the go right now?
Well, I mean, after he became leader, even in the lead up to the what became a coronation, the feeling was that this is a technocrat, a bureaucrat. He's not Pierre Poilievre. He's not a career politician. He's not a great speaker. He doesn't know how to work a room. He's not a politician. And the conventional wisdom was there was no way that he'd be able to compete if this was an ordinary election. And then there's the French. His French is not that great, although it's been getting a little better. There was a feeling that that would be a handicap in Quebec. And so when you add all of these things and the lingering hatred of Trudeau, justifiably or not, the feeling was that he wouldn't have a chance, and that at some point in the campaign, the old saying, campaigns matter, he would trip up, he would make mistakes. Now, if you remove Trump from the equation, which is impossible, but if you do remove Trump from the equation, he has not had a great week. He pulled out of the TVA debate, albeit for reasons that even some Quebec pundits feel are justified. And no political party should have to spend $75,000 to enter a debate. But that's probably not the reason he did it. It's because of the very weak French. So the feeling, has always been is that there's no way that he could compete in Quebec, that would be a handicap. And so far, it's been a big, so what, right? That comes out almost the same time that he holds a cabinet meeting, he talks to Trump, and they make nice, and that's the headline that dominates. There was a story today about his thesis, his PhD thesis, and possible plagiarism. Again, events like that, typically when the conservatives are trying to paint him as sneaky carny, hidden agenda, that kind of thing, those are the kinds of events that could feed a narrative that the conservatives want to address. It hasn't made barely a ripple. Again, that comes out the day that he meets with Trump. So, these are typically the kinds of events. Now, all the pollsters are very careful to say, if and he's way ahead, but an election is not going to be held tomorrow. We've got more time, things could happen. But I would say that as long as Trump continues to dominate the narrative, people are going to want the steady hand, the very calm demeanor of a technocrat, the former central banker. That's what people are going to want, and not necessarily a career politician. But, as a British politician once reportedly said, events matter, right? And so you just never know. And campaigns do matter. And we should not dismiss the fact that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are formidable campaigners with a very solid base.
That leads me to my first question for Darius. Darius, the economy is, of course, the number one thing on everyone's mind. Trump put it there, but it was there even before this happened, I think. Affordability, inflation, all of it. Where is Canada? Where are Canada's greatest strengths when it comes to bargaining with a much, much bigger southern neighbor? And where are our biggest weaknesses?
Yes, so thanks, Adrienne. I think fundamentally we have come into this election in a period of great economic malaise, as you rightly identified. This has been obviously exacerbated to the nth by the tariff threat. And it really leaves Canada, in many ways, sort of where it was before, but in many ways, in a more concentrated fashion, in a fork in the road. Do we pursue a clean economy path, where, in fact, obviously we can develop the clean tech and clean economy clusters in this country, a national grid potentially, really make the most of our wind, solar, tidal resources, and thereby accelerate the energy transition? Or do we fall back upon there's nothing more habit-forming than habit? Do we fall back upon the incumbent industries in this country, not least oil and gas, and look to build more pipelines as a solution, which it wouldn't be in the near term? We've seen very little in the way of actual, obviously we're 5 days into the election campaign, but we've seen very little in the way of concrete platforms from many of the parties. Prime Minister Carney has talked increasingly about economic autonomy, which I think something of a byword for energy security, or indeed energy independence as well. And he's using the term the National Energy Corridor now to begin to describe really how he sees a way forward for the economy writ large, but also for the clean economy within it. He established his First Mile Fund in the last couple of days, which really looks to link power production sites and critical mineral mining sites to rail and road. He's talked about a coast-to-coast electricity grid, which again would be a fundamental backbone to development of our clean natural resources. So there's a lot to take courage from. But fundamentally, as you say, the weaknesses lie very much in the fact that not just the clean tech economy, but indeed the economy overarchingly has become over-reliant on the U.S. So we are looking at 75% more of our exports heading south, and this of course could have a much more dire impact on the clean tech sector. Currently valued around $80 billion. Clean tech sector, 3.5% of our GDP. But these are generally small startup, scale up, size companies, and they're obviously going to be harder pressed to pivot away from a market that they were counting on, frankly, to make a go of their companies and their technologies. So therein lies the central challenge, certainly. As far as strengths, I mean, again, let's be clear, we do have this wealth of critical minerals. So people weren't even talking about critical minerals much in public a few weeks ago. Now you find it in a lot of almost casual conversation you overhear in coffee shops and the like. We do have this wealth of critical minerals, which are essential to the energy transition and indeed defense, if we want to branch into that. Canada is very well positioned in terms of the natural resources, but fundamentally has the challenge within this strength that we need to process these minerals. We can't simply dig them out and ship them abroad and then bring them back. There's no economy, no economics that'll stand up in that. So as I say, beyond the critical minerals, we do have, again, we have wonderful wind resources across this country. Solar, many people may be surprised to hear, is again, something that could be tapped to great economic gain in this country. We've saw Medicine Hat is developing the largest urban PV farm in North America right now, even though, gas city, right? So, I think this is, as I started by saying, very much a fork in the road. We have to choose the high road as a country, and it's going to be a question of which party can best support that. Poilievre and the Conservatives so far have only talked broadly about expanding the eligibility of the clean tech energy investment tax credit. So that would be all those companies that have products or services that are either about efficiency or environmental improvement, if you like. So here we are. Now, I'll just close by saying too, if you look at Bloomberg New Energy Finance's most recent energy transition report, Canada's investment in clean tech and the clean economy has grown year on year by 20%. So there is a good trajectory there. But now and we've in fact become one of the top 10 countries globally for clean tech investment. But now, again, the proof is in the eating. Will we come through this election after April 28th with a clear and concrete way of actually capitalizing on all that we have to bring to our own energy transition?
Thank you. And I want to switch back to the antiquated, oil industry. And Max, this question's for you. The pipeline question is coming up over and over. The Conservatives are full on saying that they would build one, an east-west pipeline. Carney is sort of tiptoeing around this idea. I don't think he's ruled it out by any means. He's not saying he'd do it. How good an idea is this if we've got the International Energy Agency saying that demand for oil has peaked? Does this make sense?
It depends on how it's done. It could make sense. Let me sort of start at the start with this. First, I think it's interesting, and everyone should sort of be extra skeptical of anyone right now who is using the current crisis to validate their long-standing priorities and beliefs. So you see the oil and gas sector saying, "We told you we need to build all these pipelines that weren't economically viable," and sure, whatever. There was a gentleman on BNN, the business network, the other day saying that the thing Canada should do here is cut taxes on the rich. And it's like, I think you would say that about just about anything, sir. So be wary of that. But I think there is a case for at least one more pipeline in addition to expanding the capacity of TMX a little bit with more pumping stations, and I'll explain why. So Bloomberg is it? No, the IEA, sorry, I get my acronyms mixed up, thinks it's entirely possible that demand for oil is going to peak by the end of the decade. The Trump administration is doing what it can to stretch that out, but let's assume that it happens by the end of the decade. That's all of oil and gas. And I'm going to put on my Alberta Oil Magazine editor hat here and probably frustrate some people. But Canada produces a lot of heavy oil. And the heavy complex is way less competitive and way more poorly supplied. So the other major heavy oil producers in the world, Venezuela, Iran, it is not Mexico. It is not a well-supplied market. Most of the oil coming out of the United States is very light. Same goes with the coast of Africa. And so the heavy oil complex is going to hold up way, way better than the light oil complex, even in a world of peaking demand and of declining demand. And so if we build a pipeline, let's say, to the West Coast, let's say we replace the coal export facility at Point Roberts with another oil pipeline there, I think that could be viable for 20 years, 25 years, because the half cycle cost, so the cost of just producing barrels of the existing projects in Alberta, because they've sunk all their capital, they've spent all their money, is actually very low. They are very competitive compared to other heavy oil producers. New projects, no, they can't make a buck. There's no way they're going to build more oil sands facilities, but the existing ones are actually economically viable. And so I think we could be okay there for a while with another pipeline. And the point is to use that as leverage to get the things we want, right? So if the federal government is going to buy and build another pipeline, which I don't think there's any other way, I don't think the private sector wants to touch this stuff. We can ensure high levels of indigenous equity and participation, economic reconciliation there. We can tie it to climate targets. We can tell oil companies if your barrels don't achieve a certain performance standard on emissions, they don't get to go in the pipe, right? If you don't live up to the promises you've made about reducing emissions, you have no access to your markets. And I think you could drive a lot of really positive change there within the industry in terms of emissions performance. The last thing I'll say is, it is so delightful to me that we get to see Pierre Trudeau's national energy program come to life in my lifetime. Conservatives will never acknowledge that that's what they want, but that is what we're essentially proposing right now. Is we're going to build some national pipelines. Maybe we'll add some refining capacity. We're going to source domestically for domestic demand. That is what he wanted to do almost 50 years ago, and here we are, perhaps on the verge of doing just that.
Wow, there are no new ideas. Okay, I think there's probably climate people freaking out right now, Max, but that's good. That's good. Stay with us. Because I want to ask David a question now. Mark Carney's running so far a very centrist campaign. The Liberals have moved far to the center. Well, I don't know, far is maybe not fair, but certainly to the center. They pulled back on a lot of climate policy. But Carney gets climate policy. So will he stick to this centrist agenda? What do you think?
It's interesting that we use labels, right? Centrist. I'm going to use another label that I think applies to him very well. And he's a pragmatist. And I think that he read the tea leaves and he said, the carbon tax, that might be a really good policy and everything, but politically it's done. So he kills it right away. And then he pivots to the industrial carbon pricing, which, a lot of smart people agree that that's where that's where the action is happening. That's where you've got to make the real progress. And so I think that what you'll probably see is more action on that front. And so, is that centrist, or I think that's pragmatist. He's not going to abandon his principles of we've got to do something to address the climate crisis. I don't think that he could, because then he would move too close to the conservatives. So what I would say is that as a pragmatist / centrist, what I would watch for is if they end up if the polls are right and they end up winning the election and with a majority, I would take a look at who his cabinet is. Okay, so we know that he's probably going to keep his key people because they're the ones who are negotiating with the Trump administration. So François-Philippe Champagne, Dominique Leblanc, Mélanie Joly, that trio, I think are going to stay in place because you're not going to change them in again. The pragmatist, right? He's pragmatic, right? But then look for what he does with people like Guilbeault, right? Where does he put him? Or who does he put in environment? Or is he even going to have an environment ministry? Maybe he's going to call it something else or combine it with something else, right? So I think that those are the kinds of things that we have to take a look at to see. Now, does he become an advocate of pipelines? Well, I agree with Max. I think that he'll kind of, like that, the political winds, where are they shifting? And we'll see. But he will probably know that at the end of the day, it's going to be the money that carries it, right? And if the oil executives figure that, we don't want to have to deal with stranded assets, he probably knows that they're talking a good game now, but when it comes to it, they're not going to make the investments, right? So I think that his financial background kind of gives him that he can shed the politics and look at the cold, hard economics. So again, I think that's pragmatism, right? And I think that that's what's going to rule the day. But he's always going to skirt this thing between what the left wing and the right wing want. But I think that right now he feels that he's right where he needs to be.
Thanks so much. I'm going to go to Darius, and then after this last question, I'd like to open it up to the audience because I'm sure I can see all the chats going on in the background, and I'm sure you guys have tons of questions for people. Darius, Canada's really dumped a lot of money and investment into sort of a burgeoning battery and EV industry. These automotive tariffs now maybe things are looking up. When I wrote this question, things were looking pretty bad. Now maybe today things are looking up, but it's where's the future here for that? Are we gonna are we gonna find a buyer for Northvolt? Are we gonna look to China possibly somehow? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it really speaks to the meta, which is the reindustrialization of Canada, right? Carney talked today about reimagining Canada, and I think this is that's really the keynote in many ways. Yes, there may be an argument for expanding production through certain pipelines, but fundamentally, if you look at the bottom line, for instance, there, 25 billion to build a cross-country electricity grid by David Suzuki Foundation's estimates and others, which is the same price as the never-built Energy East pipeline, much less expensive than the TMX line. So that's part of that reimagining. When it comes to energy writ large, again, we have these natural resources in wind, solar, tidal, and others that can provide baseload eventually for our industry, where oil and gas once did. We've turned our country for 167 years on hydrocarbons. Now it's electrons. When it comes to batteries and EVs, this is a very interesting case, right, where you're trying to both protect the existing automotive industry and its internal combustion engine workforce, and also translate and almost matriculate across to an EV sector. Now, at the heart of that is going to be batteries. Absolutely, Northvolt is already a cause célèbre for many good reasons. But fundamentally, the reason that batteries will work as an industry in this country is actually less to do with the batteries and more to do with critical minerals. Lithium, obviously essential to battery building and others. And indeed, we have cheap hydropower, which is the reason that Northvolt's battery plant made as long as it did was in Quebec they took the decision that cheap hydropower and critical minerals would underpin an economic case. So I think what we need to think about, again, like all things in Canadian industry, is less about this very linear attitude toward digging out and shipping on, and more about industrial ecosystems. So when you're building an automotive sector around electric vehicles, this is everything from mining critical minerals through to the midstream, so-called, processing these minerals into usable elements for batteries and others. And it's not just and again, it's not just critical minerals. Obviously, the aluminum we produce, the steel we produce, that has a home now in domestic industry if we can sort of pivot away from our existing export markets. So I think ultimately, as is often said, the energy transition is going to be achieved. It's just a question of how much blood in the water there'll be, and indeed how soon we get there. But I think there's every reason to believe that these are wobbles right now in the EV ecosystem development. We will go from strength to strength, as we can. But ultimately these are going to be part of a new clean economy in Canada that will emerge much faster than we probably recognize right now.
Thanks, Darius. I'm going to take a question from the crowd, and I'm going to throw this one to David first, but I think Max, you'll maybe want to weigh in also. David, the NDP, their polling numbers are about as low as a party can get, almost, maybe not quite. The Greens are worse. Where are they going to factor in this election, and where's the future?
Well, I mean, I was just looking at Eric Grenier, our who does the CBC poll tracker, and he was looking at the NDP numbers, and his range was 1 to 6 seats. I mean, that's just abominable. And if you were to talk to the NDP months ago, they felt that they had a legitimate shot at least becoming the official opposition and maybe the alternative. So that's not happening. And one of the reasons why a lot of the pollsters are saying that the Liberal lead is not like leads of the past is because they're getting a lot of NDP votes who do not want to go to Polyev. who are going to do the Liberals, and they're afraid of Trump. They don't want Polyev. His favorables are not great, and and they don't want a conservative government. So, I think that they are not going to all of a sudden go back to the NDP because Trump's not going anywhere, and they're not going to go to the Conservatives. So the NDP is in a real bind right now because basically they are totally left out of this debate. And, now the conventional wisdom is that they might not even achieve official party status. So the NDP is, I would say that they're in crisis right now. These numbers do not look good. And it's just a question of when and if they stop hemorrhaging. And I think the jury is still out.
Okay. Max, you wrote about this ages ago, like well before this election cycle. How would they, do you think, be able to retool to come back, or can they?
Yeah, I'm trying very hard not to take a victory lap here, but I was one of the earliest and loudest critics of Jagmeet Singh's leadership, dating back years now. He's a terrible leader. He has made this mess, and the reaping is in process right now. I mean, if they get 10 seats, they're lucky. If he saves his seat, he's lucky. And it's because he has led them to a place where they are nothing to nobody. They do not speak to the working class and organized labor groups the way they used to. They try to sound like Pierre Poilievre all the time, attacking liberals in these really sort of negative and personal ways. And then he switches back over and attacks Poilievre, and he brings the government down. Then he says he won't bring it down, and then he will bring it down. Like, he just does not have any credibility intellectually or politically. And this is what happens. They should have replaced him after the last election. That's what I said back then. And so hopefully they retain enough seats to retain official party status, and they can find a leader who can get them out of their malaise. But I said at the time, or in one of my recent columns, they need to look to the prairies. The prairies show you the way forward for the NDP. That is how you, if the NDP actually wants to win seats, that they want to form government, as Jagmeet Singh has said over and over and over again. Even in this election, he's claimed farcically that he is running to become prime minister. They need to look to Rachel Notley. They need to look to Wab Kinew. They need to look to the Saskatchewan NDP and David Eby to some extent. But they need to take their Ontario and Quebec wings and lock them in a room and throw away the key, because those parts of the federal party do not know what they're doing, and they are leading them to ruin.
Wow. Whew. Okay. I'm going to get off politics. It's getting a little heated. Darius, we have a great question from Monica. An east-west transmission grid seems to meet all our, well, maybe not all, but meets our energy security objectives, as well as decarbonization objectives. The Greens are talking about it. Nobody else, well, maybe Mark Carney is talking about it somewhat, but certainly I did not hear mention of this at a Poilievre rally I was at last night, and he gave a long speech. He didn't mention it. Why are the other parties not seizing on this? Should they?
It remains, I mean, I've just finished writing a piece about it. We ran earlier this week, and it remains something of a mystery to me. I mean, I spoke to, I think, 8 or 9 different people for the piece. And, fundamentally, this is not a new discussion in Canada, right? I mean, we've talked about building an electricity trunk line across the country for nigh on 50 years. I mean, obviously the terms of engagement have changed radically over that time. But no, I think it really remains something of an open question to for the parties to answer. I mean, why not, if you want to phrase it in the negative? This is not just about balancing a nationwide grid. It would physically unify the country. It would allow for stability of regional and local grids as well as national grids. We could roll power back and forth across the country as we need, and of course, it would generate huge economic development, and the job creation potential is almost unlimited. We could use our aluminum and our steel. We could use a lot of the clean tech cluster companies that are doing all sorts of interesting work in high voltage direct current, which is used widely in China, of course, and indeed in Europe, but not to a great extent yet here. So as I say, it remains a real question mark. I think. Prime Minister Carney, of course, speaks of an energy corridor. Now, that's him obviously hedging his phraseology, right? I mean, what we are talking about is if we are to build the kind of deployment of wind, solar, and I saw a question pop up on geothermal. Absolutely, geothermal. We have over 20 times the resource in this country to power ourselves, and yet not a single well drilled. But if we're to begin to bring together all the real energy potential of this country, we need a big fat trunk line across the country to do it. And again, this isn't about starting in BC and building across to Newfoundland. We'd start obviously locally, regionally, and connect up the dots, and that's how the thing can be built in under 5 years. I've seen estimated, which again, compare that to any oil and gas trunk line, 10, 15, 20 years to build, plus the environmental potential disasters of any oil and gas trunk line, which you won't have with an electricity trunk line and so on. So I'm really hoping that we'll see some firmer views expressed by all parties in the coming days and weeks, because this really is a nation building project that has whose time has come.
Is it a political win, David and Max?
A political win?
Yeah, for one of the parties to endorse this, would it be a political win? Like, would it be popular?
I think, I think it's going to change the conversation. I think that the spotlight is going to change back in the private sector to say, okay, what can you do now, right? We know that like the consumer angle, that's gone nowhere, that's dead. But what our industry is going to do, and then industry, as we've seen in the carbon capture debate, will turn around and say, well, what are you going to give us? So it's always this give and take, right? Well, we can't invest too much money because, whatever. But I think that is going to be the conversation. That is going to be the nature of the conversation. And depending on which government comes into power, it'll be, the Conservatives will depend a little bit more on technology. I think that the Liberals will push industry a little bit more. But it's really fascinating. And, I don't know to what degree business voices are so taken with the trade debate right now, right? That's where all of their energy is going. But once they pull back from that, that's a discussion that we need to have. I would say that's even more, well, just as important as breaking down boundaries between provinces.
I have spent too much time. Maybe I'm just too cynical because Alberta has a very complicated electricity market, and we've had political debates over it for years here, and nobody understands electricity beyond what shows up on their bill. And so I don't think there's a political win here. It's still worth doing. I think a good start would be to better connect Alberta and BC, which has been a dream of climate activists here for a long time, because if you connect more fully the grids in BC and Alberta, you can take all that wonderful hydro in BC and backstop it against our wind resources here in southern Alberta, and you can basically enable like a doubling or tripling of wind capacity in Alberta, because we have super cheap wind, but we don't have any firm backstop for it. So there's lots of, I think, sort of regional solutions there that we should be pursuing. There's no political win because nobody understands electricity other than the people who are in the market as merchants or as businesses, but it's worth doing. It is nation building.
Thank you. We are talking about here's Stan with a controversial sort of question that is an interesting thing, and it gets to the point that I think you've all made, that going toward a clean economy doesn't have to mean bad business. It can mean good for business. So Stan wonders, would an environment and economy portfolio be interesting?
One could argue that that's what natural resources Canada is, right? That's what it's become, right? And for those who there would be some people who would say that there's an innate conflict of interest. That on the one hand, and I've seen the briefing notes, right? I've seen Wilkinson's briefing notes, and he's meeting with environmentalists, but he's also meeting with a lot of oil and gas CEOs. He's meeting with a lot of business people. I would say he's probably meeting with more business people than he is with environmentalists. So that is a very difficult balancing act, right? So, I think if anything, you'd have to separate them, right? Because right now it's not working because no one's happy, right? Businesses are complaining because they're not getting enough subsidies, and environmentalists are complaining because they're getting too much, right?
Okay. Question for Max here from Julia. Is there a case for Energy East pipeline if Europe wants to buy?
Not really. If Europe wants to pay for it, they're welcome to. There's no economic case for Energy East. It's too far. Europe is a declining market for oil. It's the fastest declining market in the world. As a business proposition, you'd never really do it, and that is why it was canceled. The conservatives love to make hay about how it was the liberals and they put climate demands on the project, and no, that's not. I mean, that did happen, but there were climate demands on other projects in the queue as well. It was because Keystone XL was way shorter, way cheaper, used way less material, had way higher profitability. So Energy East was always a dog. The only reason that you would build that is for national security and energy security reasons. And I understand building it to feed our refineries in Eastern Canada to displace American, because we import a lot of oil from America and a lot of refined products. If we wanted to displace that as a way of protecting ourselves, it wouldn't be economically smart, but there's a political dimension there. But if the Europeans want our barrels, they got to pay for it because that's the only way that makes any sense at all.
Let's not forget that the only Europeans we talked to about supplying energy to recently are the Germans, and it's not been LNG or gas or oil. It's been hydrogen.
Yeah.
So while I mean, Prime Minister Carney today stumped up $5 billion for a trade diversification corridor fund, which is going to reinforce our ports, which is going to improve railroads, roads. The point is, again, how do we build a connective tissue that actually makes us an energy superpower of a sort that we can grow into being? And we haven't talked about data centers. This is the other thing. Max is exactly right. People don't understand electricity. We haven't talked about it much in this world. Electrification is going to change that. Our generation and the next, and down the line are going to have a different understanding of electrons versus molecules. That's pretty clear. So when you talked about demand for electricity rising by 75% by forecast in Ontario, for instance, where does that come from? And that's before you factor in data centers. And these things, as we know, deep seek or not, are devouring our power hungry beasts. So it is about trade, as you started by saying, right? But energy fuels trade, and it's a question of again, really what we're going to do when it comes to the sourcing of energy to bolster trade, to develop trade, to diversify trade.
I'm going to jump back to politics again. This is a question from David for David, and I don't know if this is David seeding this thing. This is looking like a two-party race pretty much right now, with the NDP dying, the Greens. I mean, I saw 338 numbers saying that Elizabeth may lose her seat.
Yeah.
So the bloc is also waning. That's probably the Trump effect. But and the PPC has been eclipsed by the Conservatives really this time around. So if we become like America, do we turn into America?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question, right? Because and I've been thinking about that when you've got two parties more or less at around 40% of the national vote. Guess what? That's a two-party system, right?
Yeah.
But our culture is very different here, and we've spent a lot of time kind of talking about that we're not like the Americans, that we're not as deeply political as and deeply polarized as the Americans. So, even though you have these two parties that are fairly high up in the national opinion polls, there's a lot of fluidity back and forth, right? Which means that people are not so dug in when it comes to, they're not so ideological. And so I think that again, maybe that speaks to a certain pragmatism, an ability to adjust to what's going on. But I don't see, even if we do become a two-party system, maybe for one cycle, I don't see that happening. I don't see the NDP disappearing because you're inevitably, and I've been thinking about this, inevitably people are going to complain that Carney, if he does become the prime minister, has gone too far to the right, right? And that is going to then give the NDP a chance to really rediscover their roots. And as Max suggests, maybe that kind of populist, Western populist sentiment, and that's where they are going to grow into a more viable national party.
Max, you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I'm not super worried that we're going to become politically like the Americans. I mean, their system is absolutely infested with the role of money. Ours is very safe from that. We have a vibrant culture of New Democrat governments at the provincial level. I just think that there is more room for a multiplicity of voices in our system. It's just that right now, I think a lot of NDP voters are very correctly assessing that this is an existential election, and they do not have the luxury of voting their conscience. Unfortunately, it's basically we got to stop this guy, or this guy's going to turn us into MAGA North. And once that threat dissipates, or if that threat dissipates, then they will return to considering the NDP. I mean, I think, again, not to take a victory lap, but I wrote a column about this where I said, the NDP should have pulled the trigger in September. That was their opportunity. They could have outflanked the Liberals. They could have been the ones maybe with 40% of the vote right now. Who knows? Anything is possible. So they need to kind of get back to the drawing board, but I don't think they're done by any means. It's just they need the right leader, and they need to figure out who they are. People ask me, or it comes up a lot, journalism, does it have a future? And I say, of course it has a future, but you have to approach it from the perspective of building what is viable now, not what used to exist. And I think the same thing is true of the NDP. They have to build something that is viable for the future, not sort of rely on what they've done in the past or what worked in the past, because we're just in a completely different moment right now.
Okay, thank you. This question is anonymous, but it's a good question. We haven't talked about the death of the carbon tax, or at least the consumer-facing part of the carbon tax, and what that's going to mean. Can we continue to bring down our emissions without it? I mean, I think we can, but it means ratcheting up somewhere else, right? David, what do you think politically? Is it politically more palatable for the tax to hit industry?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, it depends on how much of that is passed on to the consumer, right? If industry is saying, yeah, I mean, we're going to eat the cost, but the increased cost we're going to pass on to people who buy our products and services. And then if there's a political opportunist that comes along and says, see, we told you, and they draw the connection to the consumer pricing, and they say, see, it's the same thing, right? It's a tax. And then we get into this whole debate, right? But then I think the difference is that industry will rightly say we've come too far to turn back. This is something that we have to do. And let's not forget that, if we're talking about diversifying our economy, we want to export more goods to the European Union, to the EU. Guess what? They've got a border adjustment tax, right? So if our industries show that their carbon footprint is too large, we're going to be paying the price, right? So I think that the nature of the conversation is going to change, but people really don't understand that yet, because the carbon pricing, the consumer carbon pricing has sucked up all the energy, all the oxygen out of the room. But I think that once people realize, what's going on in the marketplace. It'll just be like, okay, well, that's just the way it is, right? And maybe that's where the solution should lie, is in the marketplace. Let the marketplace settle this.
Max, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I'll take a victory lap by proxy for Mark Chicard, who is an economist at SFU, and he called this 10 years ago. This was when the debate was just percolating in Alberta around what they were going to do, and the federal government hadn't come close to bringing in its consumer carbon tax. And he said, "Do not go there. Do not go there. Use regulations." I think he called them flex regs, but he said if consumers see a direct dotted line between carbon pricing and their cost of living going up, they will murder it. And he was right. It took, until the outbreak of post-COVID inflation for people to really get worked up about it. And of course, it wasn't the carbon tax that did that. It was supply chain stuff. It was the oil price shock from Russia. But suddenly people had a problem and they had an available thing to blame it on. And of course, the conservatives, lied and misrepresented it and vandalized it. But vandalism works. And the beauty of the industrial carbon price is there is no dotted line. People cannot make that connection between industrial carbon pricing on steel or oil or cement and their consumer goods going up. And, advocacy groups can try to help them understand it, but it is a losing battle and they know it. So I think that's the way forward, is to really, and that's what Carney has said, tighten up the loopholes on industrial carbon pricing, really make sure that emitters are paying a truer price, because that right now they are getting, through the output-based allocation system, they are not paying the full price of the carbon tax, and do the work there. And then do the work on the consumer side with incentives, with rebates, with carrots, not sticks. And yeah, for the economists out there, that is a more expensive per ton way of reducing emissions, but it will actually result in emissions reductions. The problem with the carbon tax is that it is economically pure and it is politically suicidal.
Yeah. But there's going to be some fallout from this, right? And I want to put this part of that question to Darius, which is, if the price of gasoline, say, is going to drop, which it is all over the place now, doesn't that then put zero emission vehicles in a bad spot? Because they are more expensive. Like, they just...
Well, as has been said, regularly for the past 50 years, you have a 4-year political term and a 40-year energy policy term, and that's always going to be problematic. The kind of near-termist focuses and the kind of weight, political weight that near-termism carries versus the long-term benefits are very hard to actually bridge in the public mind. I mean, the Canadian Climate Institute put out a report a couple of days ago, which looked at emissions reductions and proactive adaptation measures in the country, and their calculations suggest that our GDP would be $35 billion lower than it would have been by 2030 already if we don't impose emissions reductions on industrial polluters. By 2055, it's going to be 80 billion to 103 billion lower. So there is a long-term economic game to be. The game is to maybe trivialize it. I mean, there's a long-term play here that has to be properly communicated, because ultimately, yeah, I mean, maybe we're going to pay, maybe pay less today, but tomorrow and the day after, obviously, is the and that's setting aside obviously rising climate crisis, impacts. And indeed extreme weather and so on. So, I think fundamentally, yeah, there'll be people who continue to drive internal combustion engines, maybe some more gleefully because the price is lower at the pump. But this is from a bird's eye view is going to be a very short span of time. We are all gravitating rightly to the rolling batteries that are EVs, because that's about stability of the grid too. Every EV that's on the road or not on the road, plugged in at night, provides stability to the local grid and to thereby to the regional grid. So this again, it's a generational change. This is probably the only way to look at it. Those of us old enough to remember the oil crisis in '72, Canadians were given stickers through the post to put over their light switches saying "turn it off." That's the other thing we haven't talked about at all. Is the cheapest new kilowatt is the kilowatt we don't have to use, right? Or we don't use. So I think again, it's a massive mind shift, shift in perspective and outlook. But it's to our advantage if we buy in now and double down.
I just want to note Tom Peterson's in the chat, who has written about the carbon tax in BC extensively, and he made the point that, it would work. A consumer carbon tax would work if it was communicated properly. The problem is it hasn't been. The federal, and I wrote multiple columns about this. Federal government could not have communicated it any more poorly. The Alberta government didn't do much better. And the problem is, we are now in a world where social media is able to serve as a vector for misinformation and nonsense at a speed with which government providers of information cannot keep up. It is just too difficult to keep the misinformation genie in the bottle. And if we were talking about a carbon tax in 1990, I think it's doable. I think you can send people information in the mail. You can use sort of traditional media outlets, and you can kind of shape the narrative. In 2025 or 2024, it is just too difficult, and it is destructive, I think, to keep trying.
Yeah, which is why you go to a Polyev rally and he says axe the tax, and the crowd goes wild. Like, it really goes wild. So yeah.
And I think if I could just jump in very quickly, I think that the Liberals really underestimated Polyev and the message. They were so eager to paint him as a neophyte and as a thug and whatnot that they didn't realize that he was tapping into a groundswell and a sentiment that they just did not recognize. And unfortunately, the former prime minister was surrounded by people who just didn't get it. And I agree with Max. Their inability to communicate this properly. I mean, my wife just, keeps saying you should go work for the Liberals because you've been saying this for years. That their failure to communicate this is just abominable. So, yeah, a policy that should not have been killed, but was because of poor communication. But again, they hit a juggernaut with the whole axe the tax thing, and they were just powerless to really counter it.
Well, and also just really quickly, they thought they won that fight in 2021.
Yes.
They thought it was over. And Polyev just snuck up behind them and ripped their guts out on it, and they never saw it coming.
Yeah. Once the courts weighed in and said that's okay, they figured, well, we've got it. Let's move on. And then COVID hit, right? And then inflation. Then here we are.
What do you think the chances are of Carney supporting electoral reform? Which should have happened. I mean, it should have happened ages ago.
Oh boy.
It depends what the win looks like if he wins.
It depends how big his majority is.
Yeah, this is what happens, right?
So what I would say is, if you look at who he appointed as his minister of democratic reform in his new cabinet, was very interesting because he slimmed down the cabinet, he kicked a bunch of people out, and yet he had this new MP from London who was, I believe, the first elected official in Canada elected under a system of ranked ballots. And she is the Minister of Democratic Reform. So I would bet all my money that if there is electoral reform after he wins the next election, it will be ranked ballots, and he will do it very quickly. He will not mess around with referendums and consultations. He will just do it. And I think that is probably the only way to get it done in our system. And ranked ballots are not perfect. They are not, proportional to the extent that I think I would like them to be, and a lot of people would like them to be. But once you show people that you can change the system and it doesn't break the system, I think you open the door for other changes.
And then if you take a look at the demographic that does not support the Liberals, it is young people. They are still, the majority of them support the Conservatives. So if you are sitting there with a comfortable majority and you want to change the narrative and support a younger demographic, which still supports electoral reform. I mean, they were very angry with Trudeau when he abandoned that. That might be somewhere to go.
I see that I've riled up all the electoral reform people in the comments.
I know, I'm watching it roll in. That's awesome.
Chat among pigeons.
Yes. I want to raise there's a great question here. People are talking about degrowth, the finite nature of our planet, which of course is at odds with capitalism. Where, from a political standpoint, do we go if we want to save the planet? Is capitalism possible?
Let's start with circular economy, I would say. 75% of what we produce in this country ends up in landfill. So, for a start, I think we need to be thinking about the energy transition as a new a new structure for the economy, and that will, it's not going to be degrowth, as that's at least in the way we maybe define it today, but it can certainly be a self-supporting growth, sustainable growth of a sort. I mean, let's come back to the battery point. Critical minerals are infinitely recyclable. Take your choice. Finite petroleum products or infinite critical minerals, but we need to build an industrial ecosystem around that, so we can take the black mass of batteries and extract these metals and minerals and reuse them. But I think again, fundamentally, this is a generational change that needs to be taking place.
I think the conversation that's happening in the United States right now around the notion of abundance and the importance of progressives leaning into abundance, I think is crucial. I think talking about sort of degrowth or sort of a constrained worldview is political poison, and it is political poison, especially among moderates, among young people. We are inherently a growth-oriented species. It's why we are where we are. It isn't baked into our DNA, and I just don't think that there is a way to merge a worldview of degrowtherism with democratic interactions. I think any government that pursued that would get its ass handed to it and tossed out on its side. And so progressives, to me, need to find ways to pursue abundance within the framework of lowering emissions, lowering waste, circular economy. You can have an abundant world that is not a wasteful world. You can grow your happiness. You can grow your time. You can grow all these things that are valuable and important. But if you talk in ways that suggest that growth itself is bad, I think you are resigning yourself to the political fringes.
Housing. We could grow some housing. Yeah. David, any thoughts on that one before we turn it over to Linda for our closing remarks here?
I don't know. As we sort of move into the next kind of phase, I think it's hard to predict anything, right? But I keep thinking, where do the progressives go in the United States and in Canada? And I think that it's almost like an existential time for progressives to figure out what policies they champion, how far they go, what's practical, how they communicate them. And I just don't know that anyone has the answer right now, right? Because we're just so flabbergasted, right? And this is a real interesting time to pause. I mean, we've talked about some really big themes here, like almost a recasting of the New Democratic Party, right, from a different part of the country. A liberal party that all of a sudden has all this growth, a de facto two-party system that will maybe be the political landscape for the next at least 4 years. I mean, these are really big things, and this is I just don't know what the answers are, and that's I think those are the themes that we're going to be keeping our eyes on for the years to come.
We should remember George Bernard Shaw's words that all progress depends upon the unreasonable man or woman.
All right. Well, I thank you all so much for joining us. And, some of you missed dinners. Many of you missed happy hour. I know, and you hung in there with us. I'm really impressed and delighted. And it's been my pleasure. And what an interesting conversation with interesting colleagues. And thanks so much. I'm going to turn it now over to Linda, who has some closing remarks.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. Yeah. Hi, everybody. That I want to echo what Adrienne just said. Incredible to see you all here, and what an incredible conversation has been going on in the chat and with our, really brilliant team that always just blows me away. And I want to say to all of you who I think probably are among, I'm sure you're part of our community that, has been supporting us for years, many of you, and I want to thank you for that. And I want to tell you that even though the conversation in many ways publicly is moving away from climate, we are not moving away from climate. We're more committed than ever. And, we're looking at how climate merges with disinformation that's been brought up on this chat, with, how Canada's doing in the effort to shift to renewables. That's been mentioned on this chat. And, we're also looking at what the barriers are to climate policy, where, we're seeing, like the article that we published today that I hope you will all read, which was about Danielle Smith being, going down to Florida and speaking with Ben Shapiro, and basically, teaming up with Team Trump. And, these things are alarming. And the only reason that story really came out, the details of it, is because we were able to send somebody there. So I also want to encourage you to look out for our new podcast that's going to be coming. It's called The Takeover, and that's going to be, the first one will be released on April 8th. And it will delve even deeper into the movement among, kind of with Jordan Peterson at the center of it, that is connected to oil and gas, and it's connected to, some very far right figures, and it's a world movement, but it is, very alive in Canada. So that's it. I want to, please, if you don't subscribe. All the journalism that we're able to do is thanks to subscribers. You're going to get some great stories if you subscribe. And while you get a great product in National Observer, you're going to get great journalism. You're also going to be supporting great journalism with your subscription. So please subscribe, and, tell your friends about National Observer, and keep reading. And thank you so much for being with us tonight. And really great to see you as much as I've been able to see you in the chat. And I look forward to the next time we can all be together. Good night.